Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start a new topic. Before that, I would like to solve the do-not question related to previous topics. So we have an expression, rational equation, 2x plus 6 over x plus 2 square minus 2 over x plus 2 is equal to a over x plus 2 square. When you look at this expression, what is the denominator of the first fraction? Is x plus 2 square. What is the denominator of the last fraction? X plus 2 square as well. But when you look at the denominator of the second fraction, you will see that this denominator is different than others. So what is the common denominator? Because to be able to add or subtract the rational expression, you need to make the denominators equal. So 2 over x plus 2. If I multiply this expression by x plus 2, you can make the denominators equal to each other. 2x plus 2 over x plus 2 square. After that, let me rewrite the expression. And by the way, this is equivalent fraction of this. 2x plus 6 over x plus 2 square minus 2 times x plus 2 over x plus 2 square is equal to a over x plus 2 square. Now, if the denominators are equal, you can cancel them out and then you can make the numerators equal to each other. So 2x plus 6 minus 2 times x plus 2, which is equal to a. If we distribute negative 2 into the parentheses, you will get 2x plus 6 minus 2x minus 4 will be equal to a. From here, you can simplify the like terms. If we simplify 2x with negative 2x, will be 0, 6 minus 4 is 2, and a is equal to 2. Today we are going to learn how to graph a trigonometric function, sine and cosine. And in this topic, we are going to learn what period is, what amplitude is, and what midline is as well. What is the period of the graph of y is equal to sine x? A periodic function is a function for which the outputs repeat after a constant interval of inputs. When a function is periodic, f of x is going to be equal to f of x plus p, and where p is the period. So let me try to graph sine function. So before graphing this, we have an input here, x values, and we are going to find the y values. To be able to find those values, my recommendation is please use your calculator. If you substitute 0 into the sine function, you will get the 0 as well. What about the pi over 6? If you substitute pi over 6, you will find 1/2. If you substitute pi over 4, then you will get radical 2 over 2. If you substitute pi over 3, you will get radical 3 over 2. If you substitute pi over 2 into the sine function, you will get positive 1. If you substitute 2 pi over 3, you will get positive radical 3 over 2. If you substitute pi, you will get 0. If you substitute 5 pi over 4, you will get negative radical 2 over 2, because 5 pi over 4 is the third quadrant, and in the third quadrant sine function is negative. So 3 pi over 2, you will find negative 1. 11 pi over 6, you will get, let me calculate, is the fourth quadrant, negative 1/2. And 2 pi is going to be 0. After that 13 pi over 6 is going to be again positive 1/2. All right, these are the values. Okay, let me graph this. If we graph sine function, we know the x values, we know the y values. All right, let me graph this. So these are x and y values. This is 0. If you try to graph y values first, we need this is going to be 1. Let me start from here, 1/2. So let me do this. This is radical 2 over 2. This is radical 3 over 2. And this is positive 1. Same thing. This is going to be negative 1/2. This is going to be negative radical 2 over 2. This is going to be negative radical 3 over 2. And this is going to be negative 1. According to this, let me plot x coordinates. 0, this is going to be pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3, pi over 2, 2 pi over 3, positive pi, 5 pi over 4, 3 pi over 2, 11 pi over 6, 2 pi, and 13 pi over 6. Now, let me plot the coordinates. If x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0 as well. If x is equal to pi over 6, y value is going to become 1/2. If x is equal to pi over 4, then y value is going to be positive radical 2 over 2. If x is equal to pi over 3, then y value is going to be radical 3 over 2. If x is equal to pi over 2, then y is going to be positive 1. Now, if x is equal to 2 pi over 3, then your function is again radical 3 over 2. If x is equal to pi, then y is going to be 0. Let's continue. If x is equal to 5 pi over 4, then y value is going to become, negative radical 2 over 2. If x is equal to 3 pi over 2, then y is going to become negative 1. If x is equal to 11 pi over 6, then your y will become negative 1/2. And again, if x is equal to 2 pi, y is going to become 0. After that, if it is 13 pi over 6, then your function will be 1/2 again. If you combine those points, ladies and gentlemen, you can get that. Let's start from here. It's going to connect those points. So look at this. What was the definition of the period? The period is when before the y values repeat itself, a periodic function is a function for which the outputs, which means that y values repeat after a constant interval of inputs. After the 2 pi, you see, look at here, y coordinates starts repeating itself. So to be able to determine the period of sine function, you can say that the period is between 0 to 2 pi. So which means that 2 pi is your period. And look at here. Notice that the y values begin to repeat themselves after x is equal to 2 pi. For this periodic function, we can write sine x plus 2 pi is equal to sine x. So periodic of the function y is equal to sine x is 2 pi. So every 2 pi, your function is going, the y value of your function is going to repeat itself. And there's one more thing I would like to draw your attention. Generally, sine function starts from 0. Next one. What are the other key features of the graph of the y is equal to sine x? We already graphed the sine function, ladies and gentlemen, and we are going to learn here what midline is and what amplitude is. Midline is the horizontal line halfway between the maximum and the minimum points of the graph. Look at here. What is the maximum point of this function? Is positive 1. What is the minimum value? Is negative 1. So you can add them up and divide by 2 is going to give you midline, which is y is equal to 0 or x-axis. This is midline. Amplitude is the distance between midline and maximum or minimum point. Let me choose the maximum point here. So this distance is going to give you amplitude. So amplitude is the distance from the midline to the minimum or maximum value of the graph. So as you see here, you can understand your amplitude is what? 1. So your midline is y is equal to 0 or x-axis, and your amplitude is just 1. And be careful, amplitude cannot be negative. Why? Because amplitude is distance from the midline to the minimum or maximum value. On the other hand, there's also one information here. The minimum and the maximum values of negative 1 and positive 1 occur at 3 pi over 2 plus 2 pi k and pi over 2 plus 2 pi k respectively for all the integers. What does that mean? As you see here, the first maximum value is what? X is equal to pi over 2. The next one is plus 2 pi, which means that this is going to be, what is this value, ladies and gentlemen? 5 pi over 2. Pi over 2 plus 2 pi is going to give you 5 pi over 2. And if you add 2 pi, then you can get another maximum point, which is going to be 9 pi over 2. This is what it explains. Alright, let's continue. Now we are going to create cosine function. So we are going to see what amplitude is going to be in cosine function, what period of the cosine function will be, we will figure out. The idea is the same. We will find y values of these x values. Alright, let's calculate. Of course, I recommend you to use calculator. When you substitute 0 into the cosine function, you will get positive 1. If you substitute pi over 6 into the cosine function, you are going to get radical 3 over 2. If you substitute pi over 4, you will get radical 2 over 2. If you substitute pi over 3, you will get positive 1. If you substitute pi over 2, you will get 0. If you substitute 2 pi over 3, you will get negative 1/2. If you substitute pi, you will get negative 1. Remember that, ladies and gentlemen, in the second quadrant and third quadrant, the sign of the cosine is negative. Now, 5 pi over 4, this is the angle located in the third quadrant. That's why your value will be negative radical 2 over 2. 3 pi over 2 is going to be 0. 11 pi over 6 will be, let's calculate. Pi over 6 is going to be 30 times 11 will be equal to 330, which is located in the fourth quadrant, and the value is positive radical 3 over 2, and 2 pi is positive 1. Let me use the 13 pi over 6 as well. So pi over 6 is 30. 30 times 13 will be equal to 390. This is located in the first quadrant after the one whole circle. So the value is going to be positive radical 3 over 2. So we found x and y values. Now let's graph the cosine function. This is my coordinate plane, and I need 1/2 radical 2 over 2, radical 3 over 2, and positive 1. This is going to be 0. I need negative 1/2, negative radical 2 over 2, negative radical 3 over 2, and negative 1. So what are my x values? Pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3, pi over 2, 2 pi over 3, pi, 5 pi over 4, 3 pi over 2, 11 pi over 6, 2 pi, and 13 pi over 6. Now let's plot the points. My first point is if x is equal to 0, y is going to be positive 1. When x is equal to pi over 6, then y will be equal to radical 3 over 2. When x is equal to pi over 4, your y value will be radical 2 over 2. X is equal to pi over 3, y is going to be pi over 3. This is going to be 1/2, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. And this is going to be 1/2. If it is pi over 2, it's going to be 0. 2 pi over 3 is negative 1/2. Unfortunately, I couldn't draw scaled, so that's why please excuse me. If it is pi, it's going to be negative 1 here. If this is 5 pi over 4, it's going to be negative radical 2 over 2. If you substitute 3 pi over 2 into the x, into the function, you will get 0. After that, 11 pi over 6 is radical 3 over 2. There we go. And 2 pi is positive. After that, it's going to be radical 3 over 2 again. So let's try to graph this. We are going to start from here, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to go down and we are going to turn. After that, you are going to repeat itself. Remember what was the period, definition of the period? Your outputs starts repeating itself. After the 2 pi, your y values start repeating itself. This is the reason the period of the cosine function is also 2 pi. All right? Now, we already learned what amplitude is, what midline is. First of all, midline. To be able to find the midline, you need to determine the maximum and minimum point. What is the maximum of this point? Is positive 1. What is the minimum point? Is negative 1. So remember that you need to add them up, divide by 2. A positive 1 plus negative 1 will be 0. So x is equal x-axis or y is equal to 0 is your midline. So this is going to be your midline. After that, I need to find amplitude. Remember that what was the amplitude? Amplitude is between the distance between the midline, maximum point or minimum point. Let me find the distance between the maximum and minimum. It's a maximum and midline. So your amplitude is what? Positive 1. So you can also say that cosine function x plus 2 pi is going to be cosine x. So your period of your function is 2 pi. The period is 2 pi. So this is the cosine function. There's one more thing I would like to draw your attention. Your cosine function generally starts from 1. Alright, I'm going to solve those two questions and then I'm going to finish the first part of our lesson. What are the amplitude and the period of y is equal to 3 cosine x? I'm going to graph this question as well because I want you to see that when you multiply your original function by a number, how your function is going to be affected. So let's do this. Remember that to be able to find your function, you need to substitute this value into your function 3 cosine x. If you substitute 0 into the function, you will get positive 3. If you substitute pi over 6, you will get pi over 6 is going to be 30, cosine 30 is radical 3 over 2 times 3, 3 radical 3 over 2. If you substitute pi over 4, it's going to be 3 radical 2 over 2. If you substitute pi over 3, it's going to be 1/2. Yes, and then it's going to be 3/2. If you substitute pi over 2, it's going to be 0. If you substitute 2 pi over 3, it's going to be pi over 3 is going to be 1/2. Yes, 1/2. This is going to be this is the second quadrant, by the way. 2 pi over 3 is second quadrant. In the second quadrant, the sign of the cosine is negative, so your answer will be negative. 3 times 1/2 will be 3/2. Yes, negative 3/2. And pi is going to be negative 1 multiplied by 3 is going to be negative 3. What I'm doing, I'm just substitute this x value into the function, and then whatever the function is, multiplied by 3. By the way, this is going to be cosine function. Let me correct this. It's going to be cosine function. All right, let's continue. 5 pi over 4. 5 pi over 4 is going to be 45 times 5 will be 225, which is in third quadrant. In the third quadrant, cosine is negative as well. So the answer is negative 3 radical 2 over 2. 3 pi over 2 is going to be 0. 11 pi over 6 will be, I believe that this is the fourth quadrant. 30 times 11 will be equal to 330. Yes, this is the fourth quadrant. If we substitute in the fourth quadrant, cosine is going to be positive. So positive 3 radical 3 over 2. 2 pi is going to be what? Positive 3 as well. After that, if you substitute 13 pi over 6, you will get positive 3 radical 3 over 2. All right, let's graph this. This is y and x values. Your x values is, it starts from 0, pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3, pi over 2, 2 pi over 3, pi, 5 pi over 4, 3 pi over 2, 11 pi over 6, 2 pi, and 13 pi over 6. So what is your values? It's going to be 3/2, 3 radical 2 over 2, 3 radical 3 over 2, and positive 1. Same thing is going to be negative 3 over 2, negative 3 radical 2 over 2, negative 3 radical 3 over 2, and negative 3. Unfortunately, I don't have enough space, that's why I couldn't write it neatly. I hope you can understand. Let's continue. If it is 0, then your function will be 3. This is 3 by the way. If it is pi over 6, your function will be 3 radical 3 over 2. If this is pi over 4, it's going to be 3 radical 2 over 2. If it's pi over 3, it's going to be 3 half. If this is pi over 2, it's going to be 0. 2 pi over 3 is going to be negative 3 over 2. Here we go. No, not here. Here. If it is pi, it's going to be negative 3 as well. If it is pi over 4, it's going to be negative 3 radical 2 over 2. If 3 pi over 2 is going to be 0. If 11 pi over 6 is going to be 3 radical 3 over 2, which is here. And if it is 2 pi, it's going to be 3 as well. After that, your function is going to be decreasing again. Now, let's connect the points, and you will get that. Sorry. Let me start from the beginning. Your function will be as you see here, after this point, your y value starts repeating itself. So, now, what happened? Do you believe that the period of cosine 3 cosine x changed? No, because look at here, your function after the 2 pi, y value starts repeating. So, your period is 2 pi. All right. What happened? Do you believe that midline changed? Let's check it. What was the midline? The midline is the midpoint of maximum and minimum point. The maximum point is positive 3. The minimum point is negative 3. So add them up, divide by 2. You can understand your midline is same. Your midline is x-axis or y is equal to 0. So what changed? What is the thing changed? Look at the amplitude. Amplitude. Amplitude is the distance between the midline and maximum point. Look at here, ladies and gentlemen. What happened to amplitude? Your amplitude is 3. So the only thing which is changed is the amplitude. What I can't generalize, if you multiply original function, if you multiply the output by any number, output by any number, you change only amplitude. So we changed only amplitude, and there is going to be also vertical stretch.